Well, hi, and thanks for joining me today. We're here now, so thanks for joining me. We're going to just spend a few minutes today talking about the concepts of authorized, competent, and qualified, and those roles and responsibilities in terms of rope access relative to the ANSI Z459.1 standard on rope access. So make yourself comfortable and let's get started. You may have seen I've posted a little bit in the last few days, actually about the last 2 weeks, regarding the ANSI Z459.1 standard on rope access, which was recently published. And so I published just a notification that has come out, and I've gotten just tremendous response from that. People are very excited that it's finally been released, and there's some confusion and misunderstanding about what it says and what it doesn't say. And so I've been answering a lot of questions about it, and just trying to I guess get the word out and help people understand what it says and what it means and how it might affect the work that you do in rope access. So today I want to talk about competence. So a key requirement in all of the ANSI standards relative to any of the Fall Protection Code is that it's up to the employer to determine and ensure the competence of anybody that they put into any role. So whether they're designated, whatever role they're designated into, it's up to the employer to make sure that they're actually belong in that role and they're qualified to be in that role. So that philosophy carries over into the ANSI Z459.1 standard on rope access. The same principles apply. Some of the details are a little bit different. Now, again, rope access is regulated as part of fall protection under OSHA's 1910 general industry rules, specifically in Subparts D and I. Now, remember, there's a difference between regulation and standards, and we talked about that in an earlier post. So that's the regulation is in OSHA. Standardization, in this case, ANSI is the standardizing or the standardization body, if you will. And rope access is standardized as part of the ANSI Z359 Fall Protection Code. And the document where all that's outlined is called the American National Standard Z459.1 Standard, 459.1 Safety Requirements for Rope Access Systems. So that's the standard and the standard number and the designation. Now, again, you'll find previous posts where we've addressed the relationship between OSHA and ANSI and the difference between regulation and standard. And we're going to be actually talking more in future episodes about some of the specific requirements that apply to rope access practices and equipment as they relate to both regulation and standards. But first, I want to address the roles and responsibilities of individuals within the context of the Z459 document. So in previous posts, I mentioned responsibilities of qualified persons, and that apparently made some people's ears perk up. So I've had some questions about whether a qualified person is the same thing as a competent person and what that means and what it takes to be each one. And so let's sort that out first before we kind of try and move on to anything else. So for those of you who work in the fall protection world, you know that there are typically 4 different roles, recognized roles in a fall protection program. They include the program administrator, the qualified person, the competent person, and the authorized person. So those 4 roles are consistently named and have responsibilities assigned to them within the context of the ANSI Z359.2 standard on comprehensive managed fall protection program development. Now, that's a great standard, and it really does a good job of delving into those roles and responsibilities in more detail, as well as covering just a lot of ground for developing a comprehensive managed fall protection program. So if you haven't got a copy of that standard, I highly recommend it. It's extremely useful. But coming back to these roles specific to fall protection, just to summarize kind of what each of those means. The authorized person can be summarized basically as the person who has the employer's blessing to do work. So that's an authorized person. They are authorized to do work. The competent person also does work, but in addition, they are recognized by the employer as having ability to recognize hazards, and they are authorized to take corrective action. Now, that's a competent person. That's the difference between an authorized and a competent person. The authorized person does work. The competent person does work, but also recognizes hazards and takes corrective action, and has the authority of the employer to take corrective action. Now, we're still talking fall protection here. The qualified person differs from those in that the qualified person is expected to design, specify, or approve systems and equipment. But they're not necessarily out there doing the work physically. They can be, but if they're qualified to do that, but that's not necessarily their primary role. Now, the program administrator differs from all of those in that their job is to ensure that the employer's program is appropriate, that the training criteria are there, that the right people are hired, that they're using the right equipment, that they're all following appropriate guidelines in terms of regulatory responsibilities, that they have a program, they've dotted their I's and they've crossed their T's. That's the program administrator. Now, well, one person can certainly be designated multiple roles within this group of 4 people. The qualified person and program administrator are often not field people. They can be, but they're often not field practitioners. It's not part of their job description as qualified person or as program administrator. Now, that's how it works in fall protection. So what about rope access, and how does that compare to rope access? Well, the ANSI Z459 standard on rope access pretty much emulates that whole fall protection pattern. But the biggest difference, of course, is that all levels, each of those individuals is expected to have not just fall protection experience and knowledge, but also rope access specific experience and knowledge. So to qualify as a rope access qualified person under the ANSI Z459.1 guidance, an individual must possess a professional certificate specific to rope access and have extensive knowledge, training, and experience specifically in rope access, fall protection, and rescue. So they've got to have all that same information that's required of the fall protection competent person or qualified person, but they also have to have rope access specific documentation that they have experience in that realm. Now, this isn't necessarily true in the reverse. Qualified persons in other areas of fall protection might not have any rope access experience at all. And within the context of Z359.2, that's okay. But for the rope access person, for the rope access qualified person, in context of Z459.1, it is essential that the rope access qualified person have a depth and breadth of not only fall protection knowledge, but also rope access knowledge relative to everything from regulatory requirements to equipment, fall protection methods, the whole thing as they pertain to whatever jurisdiction where the work is taking place. So the responsibilities of that person, the responsibilities of the qualified person in the rope access realm include verification of the appropriateness of rope access or whatever access method is being used to the worksite or location. So that's why they have to have a broad knowledge of all sorts of fall protection. They have to be able to say, yeah, of all the options available, we're doing rope access and we believe that it's the best choice because I understand all the other options open to me and this is the best choice. They also are required to design and approve the system that's intended to be used. They have to be capable of specifying the skill requirements that individual practitioners should have. They are supposed to specify appropriate management practices as well as approve the rescue plan. Now, a lot of that stuff is the same stuff that the qualified person in fall protection does, with the exception of, again, just that knowledge and understanding of rope access. Now, again, the rope access qualified person is not necessarily expected to perform as a field technician. So let's talk a little bit about the competent person. As far as the designation of a competent rope access technician, this term competent, again, is used consistently with other OSHA and ANSI language in that the competent person or the competent technician, the competent rope access technician, is one who is expected to be capable of doing work as well as capable of recognizing hazards and has the employer's authority to take prompt corrective action. So the competent person has to be not only trained, but experienced enough that they're capable of monitoring and evaluating and following and addressing all the potential existing and potential fall hazards and other hazards associated with the work taking place. So on a practical level, generally, this means that they're named by the employer as some sort of a supervisor. They might be the job supervisor or the site supervisor or something like that. So there has to be a bit of management capability in there to be able to not only do the work physically, but also monitor the work and take corrective action. Now, you might have noticed that when it comes to the competent technician in rope access, that we're calling him a technician. And in other parts of fall protection, we call them a competent person. So this is intentional because the rope access technician, the competent technician, is expected to function as a rope access technician on rope in the field, as well as providing that immediate supervision, implementation, and monitoring of work. So, and again, in order to take prompt corrective action, they have to be skilled in the physical capabilities of rope access technicians. So in this case, we're calling them a competent rope access technician. Now, likewise, the term authorized technician is used. And that, again, is consistent with the way in which the ANSI and OSHA regulations and standards and regulations use the term authorized person. But again, we're using authorized technician because they're expected to be an on-rope person. And this authorized technician is one who has been authorized or given permission to perform certain tasks or work under the approval of the employer. So again, they're called a technician because they're expected to utilize rope access skills in the field as they perform that work. So the authorized technician has to be trained sufficiently to operate within the scope of their duties, but they generally don't have those supervisory responsibilities or authority. And they're not expected to take prompt corrective action. So, for example, if they see something questionable in the rigging, their own safety is absolutely paramount, but rather than trying to fix the rigging or revise it themselves, they're expected to call it to the attention of a more qualified person, such as the competent technician, and that competent technician is then prepared to take prompt corrective action. Or they can call it to the attention of the program administrator or whatever the protocol is under their workplace guidelines. So the bottom line here is that the responsibilities of the authorized technician begin and end with whatever rope access or related tasks they're assigned to perform by the employer. So they're responsible not only for they're really responsible only for operating within the context of the task that they've been given. So qualified, competent, authorized. Some rope access certification schemes have a level type concept going on with them, level 1, level 2, level 3. Some people have asked whether the roles of authorized, competent, and qualified equate in any way to this concept of level 1, 2, 3 involved in rope access certification. So phrased differently, is holding a certification card from a recognized training or certification organization, is that sufficient to become a competent person? So the answer to that is not necessarily. The authorized, competent, qualified concept is something that has been in OSHA and the ANSI vernacular for decades. And as far as I know, none of the rope access certification programs presently take into consideration OSHA or ANSI criteria for being a competent, qualified, or authorized person into their certification schemes. So as far as I know, that there's no one-to-one relationship with any of that, and so that is what it is. But more importantly, perhaps, we have to actually understand and recognize that no matter what your certification is, no matter what training you might have received, the only one who can authorize or designate somebody as a competent person, or as an authorized or qualified person for that matter, is the employer. So we'll say that again because it's so important. Only the employer can actually designate whether an employee is authorized, competent, or qualified relative to a given job. So the designation there isn't just about what level of knowledge or training you might have, or what skills you might have demonstrated, but more importantly, it's about what level of responsibility and authority the employer is delegating to that person within the context of a specific assignment. So just because a person has received, for example, competent technician training, this doesn't necessarily make them a competent technician. It just means they've received training consistent with that level of performance. But having that knowledge is really just a prerequisite that the employer can use as a qualification, part of their qualification scheme, because it's only upon being recognized by that employer as a competent technician and being assigned by the employer to function in that role as a competent technician that the designation is relevant. So I hope that makes sense, because it's a super, super key point, and very important to you as both a technician and uh, uh, an employer. As an employer, just because you have level 3s on site doesn't necessarily mean that they're all competent or qualified, or it's up, or even authorized. It's up to you to designate them as such. So again, in that vein, it's up to the employer what knowledge or skills are necessary for each classification for that particular work situation. And of course, this is going to vary from job to job, right? So it goes way beyond just the rope access skills. It includes knowledge relevant to the work site, as well as the task being performed or the trade that you're working in, the employer's work practices, the equipment that you're using, the relevant regulatory requirements. There's a lot involved in designating somebody as authorized, competent, or qualified, and it goes beyond just their rope access technician skills. So that then begs the question, do authorized, competent, or qualified persons in rope access have to be certified by a relevant trade organization or a certification scheme before they can qualify to become one of those levels? So that's a question that we're going to delve into a little further in a future episode, but here's kind of a sneak peek. Certification by a recognized entity is arguably one of the best ways to verify what level of rope-specific skills a rope access technician has. So it is an important consideration, but also consider most of the certification schemes that are relevant for rope access, they're certifying technicians to work all over the world. So when it comes to the training that they've received, or the evaluations that they've undergone for a certification organization, the knowledge that they've received, it may or may not be relevant to a given jurisdictional regulation. So in other words, just because somebody is certified as a rope access technician by one of these organizations, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've been trained in accordance with OSHA requirements as they pertain to rope access use in the United States, just as it doesn't mean that they have or haven't been trained to regulatory requirements in Europe or Australia or New Zealand or Singapore or anywhere in particular. So it really is a local thing. So over and above those rope access skills, you want to be sure that the people that you're hiring are understand the regulatory requirements that you're going to have them working under. As an employer, that's your job. You have to ensure that the technicians are using appropriate equipment and methods to maintain compliance under the jurisdiction where they're going to be working. So if they want to use, or you as a employer want to accept a certification card from a training provider to help establish their skill sets, that's absolutely fine. But it doesn't end there. Ensuring that the technicians you hire are in tune with regulatory requirements is also key. So that's kind of a lot to digest, I know. We're going to stop here for now, and we'll pick up later with additional questions and comments. If you'd like to submit questions and comments, please feel free to do so in the comments box here. We'll do our best to address those as time goes on. My name is Louie McCurley. I appreciate you joining me today for Rope Stuff, and hope to see you next time. Climb high and stay safe.